Fleeting moments, you catch a glimpse of an Asian male disappearing beyond a sea of Asian faces. Enough time for a positive identification or not?
Chol Soo Lee's wrongful conviction has been one of the biggest cases to happen in America. One of the saddest stories of a young immigrant who was pushed around by the broken justice system back when a lone minority like him was unheard, unseen, completely thrown away like trash. His story is so important to be remembered, making sure everybody deserves a chance to be heard, especially when accused for something you didn't do. There is a whole amazing documentary called Free Chol Soo Lee. I watched it. It brought me to tears of what this man has gone through, and I knew that I had to talk about it because it seems like this case did happen a while back, and although it was big back then, of course people forget about it. Back in the times when a face like Chol Soo Lee didn't matter. What this man has gone through is one of the craziest stories that I've ever heard of, and unfortunately I don't want to say this, but it seems like every unlucky thing that you can have done to your life has happened to this man, and it seems like my problems are literally nothing compared to what this man has gone through, and why cross-racial identification is so important in the justice system, especially when identifying a suspect, and we're going to be getting into what that is. And according to a lot of you guys, it seems like you guys missed the outfit of the day that I used to do. Well, here's my true crime story outfit of the day. I am feeling super fall. Have been attending Fashion Week, you can see on my Instagram, so I do have to wear a lot of sleeveless tops, short skirts, and you guys always been asking what my shaving routine is, and my routine, I've been only using Harry's for the last 2 years, and Harry's has been supporting GRAZY TV True Crime channel for 2 years now, so thank you so much to Harry's. Their blades are also made in their own factory in Germany, which they've been making blades for 100 years, and because it's from their own factory, there's no pink taxes, and you can get straight from their factory prices. That's why it is so affordable. You will be shocked to find out how much their trial kits are. Quality razors are the key to getting these smooth lines for me. I get high quality cameras taking photos of me when I attend events, so you know I have to keep myself as tidy and clean as I want it, and Harry's razor definitely does it for me. And the best part that you will not lose on is Harry's trial set is only $5, you guys, for this whole kit that you get. And the fact that it is so affordable, it is no brainer. I don't need any other razors. Just by you clicking the link in the description to check it out really means so much to support this channel. Thank you so much to Harry's and you guys for supporting, and let's get back to the video. I'm gonna take you guys back all the way to the 70s in San Francisco Chinatown. Now back in the days, it wasn't just Chinatown, but it seems like a lot of neighborhoods across America, and honestly any countries back then, there seemed to be a lot of gang violence that went on, especially in the broad daylight, especially places like Chinatown, where it was like mostly recently immigrated heavy town. And among the many immigrants, a man named Chol Soo Lee was one of them. Although he lived in Chinatown, he was not Chinese. He was born in South Korea on August 15th, 1952, and would immigrate to the United States when he was 12. Now, ironically, actually August 15 is Korean Independence Day from the Japanese colonial. And it seems like a lot of Koreans, when talking about Chol Soo Lee, say that being born on August 15th, you're carrying a lot of the sadness, almost the entire sadness of what South Korea had to go through. Now, being born during the Korean War, which ended in 1953, his family, his entire relatives, the entire country of South Korea went through heavy poverty. A country that has just been through a war, you're literally scrapping for food. Everything is destroyed by bombs and guns and a lot of deceased people on the streets. My grandma tells me how it used to be back then. It was not pretty. It was said that Chol Soo Lee was born out of a wedlock. So his mother was actually assaulted by his father. Back then, especially in like Asian countries, you were shamed. A lot of people could not talk about it. There was no support from your family being like, oh, it's okay, like let's get therapy. There was no therapy. People disowned you. Like you were seen as dirty, but it wasn't even your fault. I know it was horrible back then, and because of that, it seems like Lee's mother went through a very tough time on her own as well. She says that she didn't get much support from her own family, minus her sister. It seemed like Lee's mother just wanted a different life, a better life for herself and her family, so she actually met a US soldier and got married in America. So she went there to to kind of settle on her own first, while Lee was staying with his aunt and uncle back in South Korea. When Lee was 12, his mother would come back to South Korea and bring Lee to move to the US. And this is when it seems like all trouble seemed to break loose for Lee. Now, it's really interesting in the documentary, Lee's mother talks about her taemong. Taemong means pregnancy dream in South Korea, and this has a big meaning to Asians. I'm pretty sure like all countries have something like this. And this pregnancy dream is supposed to predict your baby's destiny in this life. Usually these vivid pregnancy dreams are supposed to be positive. I remember my mom telling me that. She says that she walked up and there was this sunflower that was full of seeds, like very, very, very full. And that seems like a positive dream. When she talked about my brother's pregnancy dream, he was like this big whale inside of this pond or something. So usually these dreams are said to be positive. But for Lee's mother, she said her dream was about a snake that was chasing her and it bit her. She was trying to get away from it and kill it, but the snake didn't die and it just kept biting her. So if you do believe in the whole dreams and spirituality, I just thought that was really crazy, and how you might think that dream coincided and what that meant for Lee and his life and his destiny. So when Lee arrived in America at the age of 12, he says that that's when he just became a rebellious boy. He didn't understand English, and 12 is like a very sensitive age because you're like about to be a teenager, and you didn't come when you were super young at like 5 years old when you're kind of forgetting about everything. And he says that he was admitted to a school that was Chinese predominant students. Actually, he was one of the only Koreans in the school, so there was not much Korean immigrants, at least in this town back then. Not speaking English fluently, he says that one Chinese student picked on him and they started a fight. They went to the principal's office. Principal apparently was taking the side of the Chinese student, and Lee says that he got so angry and he couldn't express himself because he didn't speak English well enough and started to literally kick the principal. Principal then called the police and tried to charge Lee with assault or battery. And Lee was admitted to Juvenile because of this. He was sent to in and out of institutions and eventually even being admitted to psychiatric ward because he wouldn't talk. Now later, Lee says that this was because simply he couldn't speak English and because he felt so alone being the only Korean. It was a big misunderstanding. He wasn't insane, and actually 3 months into the psychiatric ward, he was declared sane, and it was all because, again, he didn't speak English. And I guess back in the 60s of America, you didn't have a lot of understanding about other people, especially immigrants who didn't speak English. It was more like, what is wrong with you? Why is this little boy throwing a tantrum? I don't understand what he's saying. Just put him into an institution. A juvenile. They still had a lot better life than in South Korea because they had running water, they had a stove inside of the house, it was warm, they had a bath. Lee says that every chance that his mother had with him, she would beat him. And it got so bad that Lee would just run away from home. And now later, we would find out why Lee's mother has done this, and she would confess to a friend that because Lee was born out of wedlock and being R, Lee's mother low-key hated her son. She says that every time she looked at him, it reminded her of that trauma. It must have been difficult for her and messed with her mind, but at the same time, Lee was an innocent child himself, and he needed the positive guidance, and nobody was helping him during these crucial times. At one point, Lee would even go in and out of foster care homes. Because of all these troubles, Lee never got a proper education in school, but he did grow up, and in 1973, he finally became 21 years old. Among the people that Lee knew, they describe him as a quiet, friendly guy. He was also only 5'2", so he wasn't a big, intimidating man at all. Now, by this time, being 21 years old, he had to get a lot of odd jobs. At one point, to make ends meet, he even became a barker for a strip club, or I guess in today's translation, that's like a promoter that stands outside on the street to get customers. Now, this is when the story starts with Lee's crazy life story. One day, I guess Lee was in his break time and he was in the back room of this club that he worked at, and his manager had a gun. This was one of his first times seeing a gun or even having or holding a gun, so he was really intrigued and asked the manager, hey, can I just kind of like see it? And in the back rooms, he would be playing with this gun, and he says that accidentally he fired it to the walls of the club. Of course, no one was hurt, but he says that he was curious and it was just a pure accident. Now, 5 days would go by, he thought nothing of it, but that's when police came to his door and arrested him. But he was shocked to find out that he was actually being charged for murder. And in the main examination forensic records, the authorities wrote that the gun that Lee accidentally shot into the wall was the same bullet as the one that was found in the victim. The victim was a 31-year-old member of a Chinese gang. And according to the prosecutors, the story goes that there were two Chinese gangs that was kind of in tension with each other. And one of the Chinese gangs hired Lee to be a hitman because the victim borrowed $10,000 from them and he never paid them back. Because of this money situation, and Lee was hired, a Korean man was hired by the Chinese to do the deeds. But the main evidence that they used was a lineup of the suspects, kind of like how they used to do back in the days in the movies. And Lee was number 5 in the lineup, and you see there's different Asians. Like, honestly, even me looking, I'm like, they kind of looked similar. Like me as an Asian saying that.
The gun was actually pointed right at the witnesses. He began to run down Pacific in this direction, throwing away the gun in Beckett Alley. He then turned at the corner and disappeared.
Bus is on the way.
All of that confusion, all of that trauma, 3 seconds. And that's what led to Chol Soo Lee being put away for 10 years.
But let alone the 3 witnesses that the police brought due to this identification were all Caucasian male. Not to mention, this lineup happened months later. So these witnesses, would they really be able to point the right person among the row of people who seem to look alike? And really interesting, there were actually many people that supposedly witnessed the scene because it happened in like middle of Chinatown, and they never called not one Asian witness, someone that would be able to identify another Asian a bit more clearly compared to other races who might not be able to identify the details of other races than yours. And among the community in Chinatown, like everybody knew, as rumors and people that spoke gossiping knew, that Lee probably wasn't the murderer because it wasn't usual to have a Chinese gang hire a Korean man to do this. I guess back then also it wasn't usual for different ethnic races to mix in together, and a lot of people who knew Lee just knew that he was not that type of guy. And I was surprised to hear that back then witnesses also couldn't come forward because they were being threatened by other gang members, and being involved in something like this would just bring trouble to your family. Lee of course thought that this would be all a misunderstanding that would be cleared up, and he maintained his innocence. Lee says that even one of the officers who looked at Lee and said, "Yes, that Chinese man." And this happened multiple times throughout the trial with the witnesses and the officers, where they would refer to him as a Chinese man when he was not even Chinese, he was Korean. But of course, this was also back in the days when they didn't really care what ethnicity you were. If you looked Asian, you were Chinese. Most people didn't even know Korea existed. And frankly, racism played a huge role in putting him behind bars because he was found guilty of murder. Lee was now sentenced to the maximum, one of the harshest prison system in California. And he describes the prison system as one of the times when gangs were all at war with each other. And he was actually one of the only Asians, especially Korean, in this prison system. And Lee said there were the white gangs, the Mexican gangs, the African American gangs, and no Asian gangs, and he was left to fend for his own. And according to him, the prison system is so bad that he saw people get murdered in prison.
For Asians within the prison system, the survival depends more on to avoid aggression rather than to take action.
And 4 years would go by being in one of the toughest prisons ever. I don't even know what his mind was going through when you're just put into this hellhole and you didn't even murder anybody, you're innocent. And on top of all of this, Lee's case would take one more turn. In prison, Lee got into a fight with what they call Aryan Brotherhood. The story goes that the man, another prison mate, secretly had a knife and tried to attack Lee first. Lee, in self-defense, got a hold of the knife and ended up attacking him.
What happened then?
He grabbed me. And only time within the prison system, anybody who get grabbed is when somebody trying to stab another person, that's when you try and grab somebody.
Now, when Morris Needham grabbed you, why didn't you just run away?
Coming out self-survival, there's no place to run within the prison system. And like I said, everything just happened very too quickly, really too trying to analyze what was happening at the time.
Chol Soo Lee was convicted of first-degree murder in the Needham case.
So now he had another murder charge on top of him. Getting a second murder charge inside of prison meant that he was to face the death penalty. And this was going to be even harder to fight now that he was already in the prison system anyway. This lovely lady is Ranko. She was said to be one of the real friends of Lee. She knew him from Chinatown and they were just platonic friends, and Ranko had one of the most angelic personalities and hearts ever. She knew that he was not a murderer and just felt in her soul that it was so unfair for someone like him to go through this. She would play a crucial role in getting help for Lee and spreading the word, and she would send letters back and forth to Lee to give that glimmer of hope to him. Now, a Korean journalist of Sacramento, his name is K.W. Lee, heard about the story of Chol Soo. Being Korean American himself, he knew that he wanted to fight for discriminations in America. He went to prison himself to actually meet Lee, and hearing the stories, the trial papers, he knew right then and there that this man was innocent. When he met Lee, he described him as someone very good looking, had a smile, and had a friendliness to him. And the best way to get the word out there was to get help from his own people, the Korean community in America.
The young man was on probation. You see, it was an easy picking, you know.
You know, it didn't look good for you anyway when they came for your arrest. They said you had 41 rounds of live ammo, you had a .357 Magnum in your room, and you were on probation for felony theft. Is that a different issue, or, you know?
I mean, it is a whole different issue, you know. A lot of people say I was not an angel on the outside. At the same time, I was not the devil. But whatever I was on the outside does not justify to frame a person to put him in prison for murder he did not commit.
So KW and Ranko were able to gather the help of different activists, the Korean communities. They even went to Korean churches, that's where a lot of Koreans are, and started a donation, started a fundraiser. They even got so creative as writing a song about Chol Soo Lee. So the whole song was about the injustice, the broken system, this innocent man behind bars. And the best thing you can do really at this moment is to get the media's attention and get as many people to back you up. This lone kid that grew up almost on his own now had a huge community backing him up, and he was all over the media now. Eventually, not only the Korean community, but of course other ethnic communities came together to fight for Lee's innocence. The Korean community were able to find and get a help from the American lawyer who specialized in these kind of injustice cases, and even had a private investigator that looked into all the evidence that supposedly the prosecutors had against him. They were now able to also find more witnesses. It was actually another Caucasian man. They were able to put him through hypnosis. Now, this happened now a couple years back, so he's not gonna remember. But this man went through the hypnosis, saw clear images of the memories back then.
But you have seen Chol Soo Lee since then.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Was he one of the men?
No, he wasn't.
You're absolutely certain of that?
I'm positive.
And he testified in court to try and get Lee a new trial, saying that no, the man that he saw was not Lee. And back then, when the case actually happened, the media reported that the victim had a bullet hole behind the back of his head, when in actuality, in the autopsy, he was shot in the chest. So there were so many details that were missing that just people just scanned through and didn't care about. So with a lot of support, the court did award Lee a new trial 6 years later. But remember, Lee killed another prison mate, and that trial was now starting in 1979. And the knife belonged to the other prison mate, and it was himself against the prison mate and who was to die. And Lee claimed in the documentary that when he first went in for the trial and he saw the faces of the juries, he was really worried because it was like the injustice system playing around with him again. I guess what he meant by this was that he did not see any other minority or different faces in the juries. It was mostly similar race juries. Although now he had a lot of support that came to his trials, Lee was ultimately found guilty of the murder for the prison mate and sentenced to death. Now, I guess this is a different prison where you have to be. You're literally waiting death row alone. Really tricky, but he was on death row, although he did get a new trial for the first murder case, the Chinatown murder charge. But he still, again, technically had to be on death row, and he would spend every single day in the death row prison system for 3 years. Lee says that he waited every day for his mother's letter. And in one of the letters that he got, his mother said, "You caused us nothing but trouble in my life." 3 years into death row, he finally got the day for the new trial. And this time, the lawyers wanted to emphasize, especially in the media, is that Asians do matter. That not everyone looks the same and have the same life, and that they deserve a proper trial. But first, they were able to go back and prove that the bullets did not come the same revolver gun. I don't know much about weapons, but they called it class characteristics of the bullet, that it didn't match the original gun that Lee actually had. So this was also overlooked during the first trial. Going back to the 3 witnesses, this was also questionable. Now, one of the witnesses that was called to point out Lee during the suspect lineup was actually a juvenile guard a few years back. Because the community was so small, it so happened that Lee was one of the only Asians at this juvenile place that the guard used to work at. So the guard did know Lee. This could have caused him to be biased. The second witness also originally said that the suspect had no mustache and was around 5'10". Chol Soo had facial hair and he was 5'2". Lee's lawyer at the time described this as cross-racial identification, where another race tries to identify the suspect of another race, and it's proven to be pretty inaccurate because it is harder for other races to see another race in a very accurate, detailed description, which I also kind of agree with. It is easier for me as an Asian to distinguish and remember the faces of another Asian. You're most likely to notice something of the similar race and similar characteristics as you, or that you're used to. Especially in a lineup like this where you gather people that do kind of have similar frames in their body and also similar height as well. Finally, they were actually able to get an Asian witness for the new trial. And this man says that he actually did not come forward back then because he was afraid to talk. Again, this was back when witnesses didn't want to come forward because I guess this was due to corruption, again, in the justice system, and also gang violence. And this new Asian witness said that Lee was not the person he saw. Finally, in 1983, the juries came out with the verdict that Lee was not guilty of the Chinatown murder. After 10 years in prison, he was finally released, and here's the video of him first stepping out into freedom. But still, he wasn't totally free of the legal system yet because, remember, he was found guilty of killing his prison mates. The prosecutors did offer him a plea deal. So as long as he pled guilty, there would be no probations, nothing. Having spent prison time in his crucial youth from 21 to 31 years of age, he had to relearn what life was like and how to live as a normal man. He had to learn how to use a computer, fit in with the society. I mean, it was not easy just because you're free. But he did go on a huge tour across America to speak. He kind of became this icon and celebrity for a short time, but says that after the fame wore off, he felt incredibly lonely and lost again. Now, eventually, Lee also had to have a normal job and have a normal life. He was offered a janitor job and an office job, but couldn't keep those jobs for long. Eventually, I believe approaching his 40s and 50s, Lee felt incredibly lonely, and these feelings was just not being fulfilled. Lee would eventually rely on drugs and got addicted, and claims he went back to the streets. And the people that supported Lee was incredibly disappointed, including Rango, the girl who was by his side all this time. Now, she claims that one night Lee came pounding on her door asking for money, actually demanding money so that he can go and buy more substances. And since that incident, Rango says that she was so hurt by his actions, by her standing beside him for all these years and acting this way to her, she wanted to cut him off. In 1990, Lee would go back to the prison system for 18 months on a drug charge. And in 1991, Lee would join or hang out with a Chinese gang for the first time. He was actually hired, like really hired this time, and was ordered to do this arson job. He took the job because he needed the money to get more substances, and he went to burn somebody's office or some kind of a building, and it actually backfired on him. He tried to put this building on fire, but the fire caught onto him. He couldn't get out in time, and he had severe burns all over his body. Again, the community felt betrayed by Lee, that after all these efforts that he would just go back to the streets, especially now actually being involved in a gang. But I believe for this, he did have a deal that he would become a witness to the gangs that hired him, and he, I believe, didn't serve any prison time. Now fast forward, Lee was in his 50s now, in the 2000s. And by then, in his 50s, he did finally come out clean and wanted to really change his life. And Lee says that he's thankful for the humanity and unconditional love he received from others. Among the great pain he had to go through, something he did not ask for. And he really wanted to speak for the prison system and the justice system and how it must be changed. And in 2013, he passed away from complications resulting from his arson injuries. Which also means that the real killer of the Chinatown murder is still out there. That guy was never caught. And this guy, Lee, had to pay for all of that. And I do believe after this case, a lot of things had changed, especially for the Asian communities, the minorities, the ethnic groups, and that whole topic had to be discussed for there to be a real change. It is really unfortunate that Lee did have to later in life go back to the streets and not be able to live a true freedom life. I think he has been so traumatized and damaged so bad that it was hard for him to go back. And the story really does emphasize the importance of representation. So let me know what you guys have thought about Chol Soo Lee's story. If you have watched the documentary or heard about this case, leave a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in my next video.